And you went to Abraham McGowan. Did you
the Passion Play.
to the Passion Play?
And I went to World Sunday School Convention.
Where was that?
That was in Buffalo.
Oh, yes, but now, I know you've traveled within the country, but I went, well, I was going to say I went to 7 countries in Europe. Did you go to Rome?
No.
Well, we went to Rome, and we went as far east as Vienna. My sister Thelma and Miss Della Brown Taylor and her little daughter and Dr. Lorena Kemp. And that was a lovely experience for us. Well, now let's go on back, though, to you had gone as far as you'd gotten to Washington. Now, what do you want to talk about after Washington, about your experiences? Then did you come back here after your Washington?
17 years.
You were in Washington 17 years. 17 years. Miss Fannie, doesn't seem that long, and I visited you many times while you were over there. All right, then now you came back home, and did you want to...
Excuse me, Mrs. Norman. Is the school in Washington still operating?
Yes.
It is?
Do you hear
They
from
have a new president.
Do you hear from the president?
Yes, I do. I make contributions to the school.
Okay.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yes, you must go out there sometime.
Yes. All right. Now, Miss Fannie, you want to talk about... Mr. Winrich, did you have another question?
No.
Well, did you want to...
What did you say about some of the things on there?
Well, we're coming now to... The first question I'm going to ask you is about your... In all of your experiences, and of course we think of you as being outstanding in many areas, but I think the thousands of students whose lives have been touched by you is one of your great monuments. And I think you would like to say something about your outstanding students that you remember. Now, you can't name all, but now maybe you want to name a few, or do you, Miss Fannie?
I don't mind naming a few. I don't mind naming you.
Name it. All right, thank you. That makes me feel very good. All right.
Well, then, for outstanding students, I couldn't possibly name all of them that I know about, and of course I'm just going to try to name some of them, but they were all fine. I never saw a bad one.
Yes, isn't that lovely?
Now, let's see. Well, Miss John C. Norman.
Bless her heart.
But that isn't Mrs., though. It's Dr. John C. Norman.
Well, I see what you want to talk
Dr.
about.
John C. Norman of Harvard, and he's a noted surgeon, and he writes books.
Yes, he writes books. Miss Fannie, I think as I often think of you, and I do, I think of you as being outstanding in many, many areas. But I believe that your greatest contribution has been in the area of education, and I just think it would be wonderful if the thousands of students you have taught could just pay tribute to you as I do right now. You're just great. That's all there is to it. And now, what I want to say is, in this area of education, you've touched the lives. You've touched so many of us. As I tell the Job Corps girls all the time, I'm always quoting you, and I say, as Miss Fannie said, and they may not know you personally, but they know Miss Fannie, and I want you to name, if you will, some of your outstanding students. Now, that's a difficult question, because I know you love all of us, and you love all of them that you've taught. But would you like to name some of your outstanding students?
Mrs. John C. Norman, who is a church woman, a teacher, and a woman of note.
Now, Miss Fannie, now that seems as though that I asked for that compliment, but thank you just the same here.
Dr. John C. Norman, Harvard, noted surgeon. Captain G.E. Ferguson, Army. Sergeant Joe Turner, Army. state librarian Arthur Jackson, although she kin people.
Yes, and he was a state law librarian for 50 years, wasn't he?
Yes, he
now
was.
living in Denver, Colorado.
And he calls me Mother Superior. And I had another one the other day from New York, and it said, the littlest angel. Now, you know that was I said, I'm going to say those guys. I may not get to be an angel, so I'll keep my cards.
Oh, yes, you will be.
And Sergeant Joe Turner at the Army, have I called him?
Yes.
State Librarian Arthur Jackson, Earl Tuck, father of 3 distinguished sons in foreign service.
Earl Tuck.
3 distinguished sons.
Isn't that
One
something?
lives in Japan and has a Japanese family.
Miss Fannie, may I say this? The Miss Tuck lived next door to us. This was on Sentz Street years ago, and she had these 3 sons, Earl and Hamlin and Ruby, and Mama had Ruth, Thelma and Francis, and Earl and I are about the same age. You see, and I didn't know that Earl had 3.
Oh my, his story is wonderful.
Well, I must congratulate him.
He goes to see Greta every year.
Yes.
She's done very well. You know, she married that Huey Mills.
And Huey Mills,
an account of it in the paper.
Huey Mills has just been appointed to some outstanding job at Columbia University.
Well, he's away from that now and got something better.
Yeah, well, now they are all Charleston people.
And did you know everybody that's anything in Charleston came off of Sentz Street?
Well, bless your heart. Bless your heart.
It's true. All the people that didn't come off of Sentz Street, they came down there so often that they got to start. But really, when I try to look up, beginning with the Leon Sullivan, and the whole thing, it just came from down Sentz Street.
Yes, Leon.
And I could see, I've been thinking about it for years, and I wonder why it was. And you know why?
Why?
Because they were Christian families, and they were the foundation of the churches, and they brought their children up to be obedient and ambitious and clean.
Well, I think that
Sentz Street really has given us something.
Well, I think that the old residents of Sentz Street would be very proud to know that you think that, Miss Fannie.
Well, I have it to prove.
All right. All right, then let's see. Now that you were talking about Earl Tuck,
was a English father, and James Copper was a principal of the school. Charlie Payne was a dentist, and Mrs. Norman.
Yes, well, you've talked about me now.
I'm not going to
Don't talk about me anymore. And here you have Mr. Ambrose. Were you going to say something about Irene?
Yes, I thought I would, because I'm talking about Irene herself, because she became the Woman of the Year and very, very prominent in club work in the island.
Yes.
And she's a teacher, been a teacher ever since she's been over there.
Yes, Irene became the president of the businesswomen of the island, and they would send her as a delegate here to this country. You knew that.
Well, she sent me a paper with all of that in it, but I thought it was, she was appointed, it was elected or honored as the Woman of the Year.
Wasn't she a native of Huntington, Miss Fannie?
Yes. And graduated from Institute.
Yes. Well, Miss Fannie
and her husband was sent over there by this government, to the United States government, as an officer. I don't know what his position was, but he was sent over there, and then she became a teacher.
Yes. Well, now we were talking about students whom you have taught.
Well,
yes, that you, as we said, you couldn't begin to name all of the students who have made marks but these are just a few. Was there anyone else, Miss Fannie?
Now let's see. No.
Yes, so there are others, but you just can't recall.
I wish I could.
And as we go on, perhaps someone else may come to you. Yes. You know, this is no time to inject this, but last time we were talking about the state fire, and you and I were not talking about the state fire, because you were talking about a fire when you were a little girl, and I was talking about a fire that when I was a grown lady, but you know, we weren't little girls together.
The
we
truth,
were
and then the truth is, it wasn't a fire at all. It was a mistake of what it was.
Yes.
You know, something happened. I can't remember what that was, whether it was a fire or not.
But I was talking about the fire of the state capitol. Yes.
And I was talking about that I was sitting on the rock.
Yes.
And that wasn't so.
That wasn't. Now, Miss Fannie, I think There are so many things that you want to talk about. You want to talk about what of the Negro home, what of the Negro church, and the Negro in education and in politics. Comment on some of these.
Well, let's
Van.
begin at the top. And begin.
All right. You want to talk about the home?
Yes, the Negro home and the advantage of the Negro home in those early days and the disadvantages. Now, what were the advantages of the Negro home in those early days when there was very little money and very little learning and all of that? What was the Negro home worth? It was managed and Christian. That's all we knew was our religion. That's all we had. And that's what was the salvation or the foundation of the Negro home. We had little money. Now, I don't know about this. My mother, and this isn't my time, I'm just going back. But what we are thinking about, that they had this advantage, that the Negro mother and the Negro father had to work together to keep their children. The Negro mother could take care of her children better in the early Negro home than she can now because she was poor. She had to take in laundry and things and do work at home so she could take care of her children in this home, and then she could direct them. Now, that Negro child that grew up in the early home had this advantage, that the mother had the guidance. They had to learn to work. The mother knew where they were. But now she goes away to work. The mother goes away to work and leaves the children with somebody. White mothers leave them with babysitters, and Negro mothers leave them around in the neighborhood, well, many times to take care of themselves. So that I think the early Negro child in the early Negro home had some advantages. Now the school, none of those things were like they are today, but we don't have advantage of them anyway. We don't take advantage of school. We take advantage as far as we know, but we are not comfortable. Segregation or integration, in many cases we're not comfortable in school. And because of that, we don't have the same ambition, the same desires to achieve that we had before.
Miss Fannie, while you were talking about the home, I couldn't help thinking about my home. And I never thought of this until Miss Lena Rice, the late Miss Lena Rice, when we were thinking about working up the history for the centennial of the church. When Della Brown Taylor and I went up there to interview her, she said, "You know, Ruth," she said, "this is one thing I would like to write down, and I think Della has it on tape." She said, "Your mother was the first Negro woman to send 3 girls to college." I had never thought about it. Now, Miss Carrie DeHaven was the first college graduate to come back into this community. She went to Wilberforce. And then Lucy Cash Jones and I were the second. And you'll remember that Miss Cash and Mr. Cash worked for several governors and worked hard, as you said. And Mama, who had never worked, went to work when I went to college and went down to Nitro. It was during the First World War. But as you say, these mothers worked, and for the most part worked in the home as far as possible. Now, you know, you've talked about the home. Now, do you want to talk about the church?
I'd like to talk about
all right, talk about the church.
The church was a Negro social center. There, when you went, Sunday came, you put on your Sunday clothes and went to church. You didn't have all these dives and things around. You couldn't go anywhere but to church. It was just a social center, and it was a wonderful time. You just went to church. Now, I went to the Presbyterian church because these people, these roughnecks, lived way uptown, and nobody to take me, and they just took me to church, to the Sunday school with just by myself. And from that has grown a lot of things. I was made the superintendent of the girls' home down to Huntington because Nell Ritz, who she married Judge Ritz, Nell Ritz just worried him so that he had to appoint me down there. I know many Negroes who've gotten prominent places because of their families working in white families, and it's given them lots of advantage. And I think we've lost something. The people that knew us don't know us anymore.
And we have to have contacts, don't we?
You do have to have.
Now, what about the Negro in education?
Well,
Have you commented on that enough? If I ask you a question.
well, I would like to say something about that. Mr. Davis, well, I'd say Father Rice is the beginning of education in this valley.
Now,
Father
is
Rice.
that Mr. H.B. Rice, or was that his father?
Mr. Lewis Rice, his father.
Mr. Lewis,
Reverend Lewis Rice, the father of Henry Rice.
which is Mrs. C.E. Kimbrough's
His father.
grandfather or grandfather?
her father.
Her father.
Mr. Lewis Rice is the grandfather,
Yes.
and Mr.
H.B.
H.B.
Rice.
Rice is the father.
Now, these are the early educators, Negro educators.
Well, now let's see. Mr. Rice brought Mr. Davis here, and he was the first Negro school teacher, I guess they say, after slavery. Mr. W.H. Davis. You remember him?
Was he the clerk in the First Baptist
He's
Church?
a clerk in the First Baptist Church, and he's the grandfather of the who?
Of
Green, Miss Green.
Yes, oh yes,
And
Miss Inez. And I'm trying to think of the girls, the two daughters that I know so well and whom I taught. Yes,
Well, he was a teacher, and later on he became my teacher. I remember he was giving some lessons, and I learned more from Joe, his daughter, than I was from him. And I'd say, "Joe, what your daddy say?"
Yeah.
And she could tell you just as plain. But he would be telling us something about a lesson, and Joe could just make it plain. Joe and I sat together
Yes,
at
and
school.
so,
She was
well,
smart.
now were we commenting on the Negro in education? Oh yes, you named those early organizers of our school, and they were the organizers in our churches too, weren't they? Now, what about the Negro in politics?
Well, the Negro in politics, I guess I came along in some of that. I enjoyed it, I know. They used to do so many things for you. The governor would do so many things. And I thought I was getting a lot of money when I was being paid $3 a week. He wanted to run for governor. And he told Mr. Starks to start governor.
Corkle?
Hmm?
Corkle?
No.
Cornwall?
Wait a minute, oh my.
Well, that's all right.
That's okay.
It may come back. It may come to you, Miss Fannie.
You think of some more, and I'm sure Dawson.
Dawson. Yes.
William O. Dawson.
Yes.
Well, he wanted to be governor, and Mr. Starks had a store, and he told Mr. Starks, talked with him several times, and said he wanted to run for governor, and he wanted him to run a paper so that Mr. Starks was the head of the KPs of all over the state, and he wanted him to run the paper. I was writing for the Charleston Daily Mail, and Mr. Starks took me into his to work with him, and the Charleston Daily Mail kept the copy all the week that I'd send in daily and put it in Mr. Starks' weekly for Governor Dawson. Well, I was just having a big time then, because when we came down to get the paper out on Thursday, why, we would just have all kinds of food, order anything you want, because the governor was paying for it. And we just had wonderful times at that. And then that was my newspaper experience. The Charleston, West Virginia Advocate was the Negro paper, and the copy from the Daily Mail was saved for the Negro Weekly.
Now, when you mention that, then I think of Mr. Sam Starks. I think of Miss Virginia Gilmer, because they wasn't Mr. Sam Starks connected in some way with the Advocate.
He's the one who started the paper. That's the reason.
He's the one that started. And then it just has come to me. I've been sitting here trying to think so hard of Mr. Davis's two children. Miss Ines Green was one of Mr. Davis's daughters.
Yes.
Right. And then I'm thinking about the granddaughter, Muggy. I call her by her nickname, and I can't
Muggy.
think of, yes, I can't think of, well, anyway, you see, Miss Fannie, I can't remember as well as you remember. All right, but now let's go back to this politics business.
Well, now this is what I saw about politics. I learned a lot of things. I used to get to go places with Mr. Starks. He'd go all over the state for the governor, and he'd take me along because I wrote for the Daily Mail, and when Booker Washington or anybody came, I got to go because I could do the writing and get it in the mail. So that I got I had a good time.
Yes. Speaking about the Negro in politics, wasn't Mr. John Gilmer in politics years
Well,
ago?
Mr. Starks was the leader of the politics,
Is that
and Jim
so?
Hazelwood.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Starks, this is what I learned later as I look at the politicians. Mr. Starks wasn't a bit selfish. when he wanted something, governor wanted to be the governor, he, in the meantime, would always want something for the Negro people. He'd say he's going to organize a club that if a man took $1 from anybody, he couldn't belong to the club. Now, he'd say, I want a man put down to the post office, I want one at the city hall, I want one at the courthouse. Mm-hmm. Now, he'd name them. Now, when that campaign would be over, all those men would have those jobs. Mm-hmm. Mr. Allen DeHoney and those men would have jobs. Sentz Starks, maybe the governor, Governor Dawson appointed him state librarian. But he saw that all the other men had something, got something out of it, so that his politics weren't selfish. Most of our men, when they get a political job, you don't ever see them anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, Mr. Winovich, you'll be interested to know that Miss Catherine Gamble, who is my contemporary, my good friend, is related to this Mr. Sam Starks. In fact, he married her aunt, didn't he?
He did.
He married her aunt. This is Mr. Sam Starks is a man years ago who headed up the Knights of Pythias here in Charleston, and the Knights of Pythias built this building on the corner of Washington and Dickinson Street, across from St. Mark's Church. Perhaps it's been raised since you've been here.
I think it has.
Well, now, Mr. Sam Starks is the man who was behind. Is that right, Miss Fannie?
Yes, it's right. It's more than right. I was so afraid Mr. Winovich was going to ask you, where is it?
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a beautiful building, 3 stories, and met all of our needs. It had upstairs, the whole building was for recreation. That would have all the lodges had their meetings. All over the state came here to have the meetings.
You said something very interesting to me. You said when Booker Washington came to town, then the Daily Mail sent you to interview Mr. Washington. How many times did you see him?
How many times I saw
Frequently?
him? Yes, he didn't know any place to go but to my grandma's.
Yes, but this is interesting too. If Miss Fannie just had time to talk about the people she knows, Booker T. Washington, Paul Laurence Dunbar.
I know him very well.
Let's save that for some other time then.
Really, it's just remarkable.
Booker T. and Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Yes, indeed, and great actors she has known, and
Well, I've lived a long time after Mr. Winovich.
Can we reserve that for next Friday?
all right, let's.
The artists and writers.
All right, let me ask her one more question. Well, perhaps we will. Perhaps we'll start with the Negro preacher and the Negro in sports, because she would like to comment on that.
Please.
But until next week, then, Miss Fannie, we will. Will you honor us with your presence?
Don't say that. Don't say that. I think if you are tolerating me, this is such a lovely place. We just have a real good time. Have it like we used to have for the governor.
Well, then we'll just sign off for today, then, Mr. Winovich.
Thank you, ma'am.
All righty. Well, we're here again to interview Mrs. Fannie Cobb Carter, one of the most interesting personalities, not only in Charleston, but in the state of West Virginia, and I would say in the nation. Miss Fannie is, well, I should say to begin with, this is Friday, May the 22nd, 1970, and here with us are, in the room with us is Mr. Winovich, who is the, Mr. Winovich, I always forget your title. What is your title?
Library Director.
Library Director of the Kanawha County Library, and a good friend of ours. Now, Miss Fannie, I can't call you Miss Carter because
I don't want you to call me
because
Miss Carter.
it's endearing to me. I mean, it's an endearing term to call you what everybody else calls you, Miss Fannie. And so that's what I'm going to call you today. Miss Fannie has talked about, so many interesting things in her life. And today she's going to talk about distinguished West Virginia Negroes she's known and other noted persons, and her experiences in the field of education, and distinguished Caucasian families who have meant so much in her life. We're just going to have a good, Miss Fannie, you and I have a good time talking all the time, don't we?
I have a good time.
But there's something I want to add, I want to say before we forget. The last time we were talking about early educators, and you mentioned the name of Mr. William H. Davis. You remember?
Yes, I remember.
And he was the grandfather. This is what I want to make plain, because I think I did not make it plain the last time. But he's the grandfather of Mrs. Mabel G. Worcester, who lives here in Charleston, who is the mother of 2 fine young women whom I taught, Margaret and Inez. Now, you knew Mr. Davis well, didn't you?
Oh, he was my teacher.
He was your teacher?
Yes, he came from Malden to Charleston, and he was my teacher.
Is-
He's my uncle's teacher.
Really? I didn't know that. Well, all right, Miss Fannie.
Let me ask you this other thing. What about Mr. Shaw? I'd like to make that clear.
Well, you make it clear. You say...
Have I done that? Have we passed Mr.
Yes,
Shaw?
you said, this is what I remember, you said that was he Reverend Shaw?
Reverend Daniel W. Shaw.
Was the father of Mrs. E.L. James
Senior.
Mrs. Stella Shaw James. Well, what, did you want to add anything else?
Oh, yes. I thought I did it. He did much for the schools. He came here from Oberlin College, and he did much for the schools that should be done. I don't know what I was saying about, but I'd like to.
You just wanted to cite him. Well, I think you talked about him the last
Well,
time.
and that'll be all right.
Yes. Now, let's go on with the...
personalities?
Well, it's you, I think distinguished
Distinguished
West Virginia Negroes that you would like to mention.
Booker T. Washington. I'm going over these quickly.
All right.
Booker T. Washington, who Governor George W. Atkinson often had to come and go through the state and lecture especially to the coal people, coal miners.
Is that so?
Yes. Mr. Pilgrim used to take him around through the state under Governor George Atkinson. Dr. C.H. Payne was a minister, a legislator, and he was an ambassador to the Virgin Islands.
Was he related to the late Dr. Charles Payne? Oh, no,
No
this is
relation
no
at all.
relation. Oh, I
No
see.
relation at all.
All right.
Professor Bird Pillman, of course we remember he was the president. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who's written the most complete history of the Negro.
Is he the father of Negro history that we now observe, Miss
that we
Fannie?
now observe.
Carter G. Woodson. Was he from Huntington? Did he live in?
Well, he lived here in Huntington. He lived in Huntington. Was educated in Huntington. Graduated from the high school in Huntington.
Is that so?
Miss Leota Clare was his teacher. That inspired him.
Miss Leota Clare, is that so?
Inspired him. He always said that. He spoke of her in his history.
Is that so?
Did Dr. Woodson teach at West Virginia State College?
Yes.
And you spoke of Miss Leota Clare, whose daughter is now a retired teacher, Mrs. Maud Alice Clare.
Yes. Maud Alice Bennett.
Miss Maud Alice Bennett, yes. All right, and who else, Miss Fannie?
Now,
Mr. Starks?
you give him credit for the history.
Yes.
I guess that's in this library. I hope it
Yes,
is.
ma'am. It is. Several copies.
Well, that's all right. Now, Mr. Starks. Mr. Sam Starks was, Mr. S.W. Starks was, he was, as a young man, a man came here from New England who made him a telegraph operator. And he was the first Negro to ever be in a position of that kind. And then he came here and he organized the first KOPs.
Knights of Pythias.
Yes, the Knights of Pythias of the state, and became the Supreme Chancellor of the world.
Yes.
You remember that?
Now, did Mr. Arthur Jackson go in the library under him?
He did. He was a little boy in short pants.
And stayed there for 50 years.
Yes.
But started with Mr. Sam Starks.
Sam Starks. Mr. Starks. Let's put that in there. Yeah, that's, of course, it's in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Go on, Miss Fannie.
Now, Mr. S.S. Danridge, I'd like to make note of that because he's one of the first Negroes who ever had any money. And he built that hotel, 3-story hotel, right off on McFarland Street, right off of Virginia. And it's there now.
Is that so?
And it's occupied. And we have built and torn down more things.
Is that...
S.S. Dandridge was the first Negro who was, really had any money. And that's what he did. He built the 3-story hotel that's over on that street where I tell you, McFarland, near Virginia. And he had what these other restaurants that have around town, he had the only one. All businessmen took their lunch with S.S. Danridge on Canard Street at the end of Alderson. And it was it was in the basement. You had to go down the steps. But, of course, there was no integration then. And it was only for white. and he made all of his money in that restaurant. I don't know, I guess you just called her eating house. What do you call it? It wouldn't be a restaurant because...
Well, it was something on the order of the nice eating places that we have now in Charleston, I imagine. Well, who else, Miss Fannie?
Well, let's see. Now that's enough of them, I suppose.
Right. Well, you were going to... Do you want to...
I finished all of them down to that.
Yes.
Well, now these are others. Marion Anderson was a friend and a house guest often. And Nanny Helen Burris, educator. And Mary McLeod Bethune, an educator and orator. W.E.B. Du Bois, often a guest. Kelly Miller also.
In your home?
Yes, Kelly Miller just stayed there.
Is that so? He was
and they just took the house when they came. They just got chairs and went all over the hill and read and just made themselves at home.
He was my dean of the Arts and Science Department at Howard when I went there, and his son Newt liked me very much.
Well, you might have been a Miller.
Well, Miss Miller and Dean Miller they really liked me very much too. All right, now
Richard B. Harrison.
Oh yes, tell us about him, Miss Fannie.
Well, Richard B. Harrison was with the what was his? I know. I'm not going with you. I thought of that sooner when the steps from Mr. Winovich the other day. Green Patch.
You remember much better than I, Miss Fannie. Really, I know so well too. Yes.
Well, he was. He used not to be so prosperous, and we saw much of him at Institute. He used to come there to speak.
Yes.
And we saw much of him
Miss
at Institute.
Fannie, I want to tell you something. When I was a little girl, Richard B. Harrison, I'm sure it was, who came, we had to go to entertainments at the old Mercer School, which was then on the plot of Charleston High School. And I remember he spoke The Cataract of Ladore by Robert Southey, and I was a little girl, but I was so impressed with him.
Yes,
he was great.
Have to have more people like that come now.
Yes.
George E.C. Hayes, he's written such a wonderful book, and he was he's written a number of books.
These are your personal friends.
He's a personal friend. Paul Laurence Dunbar.
You knew Paul Laurence Dunbar?
I went to parties with Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Miss Fannie, oh my,
somebody said
wonderful.
If you go to a party with Paul Laurence Dunbar, you expect to stay all night, because when he gets to reciting and gets 2-3 drinks ahead of his reciting, he'll stay all night.
And did he ever recite for you? They had a great big party down at the Tom the other night.
He's recited lots of it.
Dialect, yes.
I think we ought to keep some of those things now.
Yes.
And Fred Douglass. Well, Miss Burris, I've been in every place, every room, and been all through his archives, not all through them, but through a great many of them. Miss Burris had charge of that building to have it fixed over again, and she had charge of it. I'm going to be through in 1 minute.
No, I just thought I'd sit a little
Fred Douglass, I felt there like I do in this office. Miss Burris used to have to go over on Sundays, which you're having things done, to see if it was done properly. And I'd just sit around in there and read everything I could find. And in this bedroom, and all the things are just left like they were, so that I've had very good contact with them. And you know, Mr. Mitchell is Fred Douglass's nephew.
You mean
it's Charlie Mitchell?
C.E. Mitchell Institute?
Yes, that's the way we used to have the paper. He edited the North Star during the slavery time.
Miss Fannie, do you mean to tell me that Mr. C.
Charlie
Mitchell, who was connected with State College for so long, was related to...
You know, Mrs. Douglas used to come down there anytime and spend the winter down there at the Institute, and she was, she just took part in everything, just act like she was one of the students.
Well,
would this be the Mrs. Mitchell who had the kindergarten?
No. She's a music woman.
She was a very fine music teacher, and she and her husband were important people.
Yes.
Well, Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Mitchell had a little kindergarten, and when Ruth first started to teach at West Virginia State, David must have been about 3 years old, and we took David to a kindergarten just off campus. And it was Mrs. Mitchell's kindergarten. She was helped by Mrs. Carter.
Is that so?
It's not Mrs. C.E. Mitchell. I'm not sure.
Oh, no,
No.
it was not. I didn't know that.
Uh-huh.
But I'd like to know. It seems to me I'd know that, Miss Mitchell.
I too. I'm sure if I knew her first name, and I was thinking of Mrs. Ulysses Carter, but I don't know whether that was the Carter or not. Well, anyway, we'll go on now. Your next person here is a well-known local character. Call his name, Miss Fannie.
Well, he is one man that while I went to serve him, I had a new religion, a religion that went outside my church. If you worked with him, you had to work for everybody. And he taught me to go outside of my church to jail.
Yeah.
To the jail on every certain Sunday. We had to go there. And once or twice I've met some of my friends in jail.
Oh, Miss Fannie. You mean you go there to conduct devotionals?
Yes, and to
befriend
mingle
them.
with those people.
Yeah.
And they often came into the church and came to his mission and lived there
But
until they found their way.
We haven't called his name.
Well, I'm calling out Pat B. Withrow.
Mama's good friend. My mother,
yeah.
Miss
That's when I
Stevenson,
used to go to Sunday school, go up to your
yes,
house.
and Mr. Withrow were Mr. Pat.
We thought, okay, folks.
Yes.
You know, I'm fascinated by the name of Marian Anderson. When she
yes.
visited, did she sing?
My, yes. She'd have her musician, the man who played for her, they would both be together. And she did two things. She used to play and sing, and then she'd drink a lot of buttermilk because we had our own cow. And he would just beg her. He'd get up from the table and say, "Oh, Marian, you have to sing. Please don't." But she'd drink her buttermilk and go on and sing.
Miss Fannie, you didn't know this, but when I was either a junior or senior at Howard University, Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who was then our minister, brought Marian Anderson to Charleston, and I'm sure we didn't pay more than $1 to hear her. And years later, you remember she became this renowned person and was the first person to fill to capacity the municipal auditorium when Mr. and Mrs. Nutter brought her here. I think it was the NAACP that brought her here. And
But
then,
she'd been here before that.
yes, she had been here before because Dr. Mordecai Johnson.
Leaving, she was here the first time.
But Dr. Mordecai Johnson brought her here too. But once she came, and I remember we all sat on the piano stool up there with Mrs. Gamble, and she was such, Mr. Winowich, she was so, she wasn't eccentric. She isn't an eccentric person. She's a great artist and a great woman because she's just herself. She's a wonderful person, Marian Anderson.
She certainly has no idea of her own worth. None.
All righty.
Well, I guess that's enough
now
of
let's
that,
talk about, Miss Fannie, let's talk about families that have meant so much in your life. And I'm sure most of these are Caucasian persons. And I think this is important because we so often categorize people and say all people hate or all people, and they don't. And here are some fine people who have meant so much to you and have been helpful in your life.
That's what I was saying to Mr. Winowich. It isn't a matter of color. I told him I had known the time when if Mr. Spillman's cook hadn't gotten to Mr. Spillman for that particular day, I couldn't have done what I did.
Yes.
Or his cook got to it.
Yes.
If Mr. Spillman hadn't acted, I couldn't have gotten it. So that it did. She was colored and he was white and I'm colored.
Yes.
And it didn't make any difference. What had to be done was done.
Someone has said it's not the color of one's face that counts, but the color of one's thinking. Don't you think that's pretty good?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
I always say that we need desegregated hearts.
Yes.
We need the trouble with us is that many white children have been brought up to think that we are inferior, and as a white boy told me, said he was afraid to go out in the woods in the country at Virginia because his mother told him those Negroes would get him. And he said, when I've come to Huntington, I found the only people that I know about that are decent and respectable are colored people. He'd come out to my school and the girls would fix his lunch, but he would just clean up or do anything that's to be done. If there's anything broken, he'd just stop the whole thing and stop there and fix it.
Yes. Well, they're just good and bad in all groups. Now, let's see. Who are some of these families that...
All right. The Ruffners. I said I have down here what I remember. The Ruffners to me were just a foundation something. They taught me about God from flowers and fruits and fowls.
Is that so?
Yes, they taught me when I picked those violets, I knew God made the violets and put the pretty dresses on them. They told me that all the time, and I'd be picking my violets to take to people, but I always had that, and I've taught it
Now, are these the Ruffners for whom Ruffner Hotel
Yes,
is?
yes.
Isn't it too bad that Ruffner Hotel is being raised now, one of our own?
It's too
old
bad that
landmarks?
house that I used to live in and sit out the window and look out, that's been torn down, I believe.
Is that so?
Well, let's go on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's what I remember about the Ruffners. They gave me an idea of God and of truth and of obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I never heard one of them in my life say, don't do that, or touch me like anything. I never knew one of them, men or women. I can't understand that.
Kind people.
Of the years that I was just a little something. I ought to have been told a lot of things, but it seems like I just must have done just like they told me.
Mm-hmm.
I just must have always done.
Well, you were obedient.
Yes,
they were kind
and then
good.
too, then they were fine examples.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard anybody say a bad word, nor never saw anybody smoke or any of that thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that I guess I didn't know anything to do. Because I never heard anybody say anything to me, and I try to think now, am I sure about that? But I never heard my grandma, I called her grandma, I never heard her say, don't do that. Wherever she went, I ran along with her. Wherever he went, I ran along with him.
Mm-hmm.
I could only go as far as that gate, but I knew that.
Yes. Well, you see, there was discipline there. Now, let's see, who are the next
Now, the next of it, what I'm saying is that I've always lived on Canal Street.
Yes.
At the Winklers were the next people. What do I remember about them? The marriage was there. Mr. Roma Winkler married Miss Betty Leps. Isn't that a long time to remember what her name was?
Yes.
Leps is an easy name. I don't know anything about them, but just I remember her name was Betty Leps. And he married her and brought her home, and we were always so proud to see she had pretty dresses and things. And she had been a school teacher. And she gave me, now the Ruffners had always, when they went away, bought picture books for me, little books for little children. I'm a bigger girl. And this Miss Winkler comes up with a chatterbox. I'd never seen it. They had little songs in it, little games in it, little verses in it, for good manners and all that. So I remember that book. So whenever I see chatterbox, I think the Winklers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said you had, I was thinking about what you have taught me as a little girl. Politeness is to do and say the kindest thing in the kindest way. Hearts like doors will open with ease to very, very little keys.
Now, you see, that was my teaching.
And don't forget that two of these are, thank you, sir, and if you please. And you better be polite, too.
Well, we didn't have it. We were just, we used to have a good time.
Oh, yes.
We just had a good time.
All right, Miss Fannie. Those are the Winklers.
Those were now the Ruffners. I told you what I learned about them. I learned about God and truth and obedience. And the Winklers, I told you that they were just as kind. I never saw a bit of difference in those two houses, the Winklers and the Ruffners.
Do they have descendants here here in Charleston now?
Well, no, I don't know them if they did.
Is that so?
But his daughter moved across the river when I lived at South Hill. She moved over there, but
you don't know.
I don't know
All
anything
right.
about them.
And now for the...
Now let's see the chatterbox. Now the Charles Lewises. The governess that taught their children had to give me my lessons at night with their children when they had their night study. I had to be there. I had to be there when they started. I had to be off to school on time. They did everything to promote my education, the Lewises. And from that time on, everything, their 50th anniversary, their funerals and their weddings, there was the one that we didn't have an invitation just like everybody else. Now, Bradford Laidley. You know, I like to talk about Mr. Laidley.
Yes.
Mr. Laidley married Miss Cora Bradford right on the corner of Capitol and Washington. No, up this way a little further, but on this street, on Capitol Street, Mr. Laidley married her, and I thought I didn't know, I knew I wasn't the bride, but I thought I was something. And I bought all the lace and things for her clothes. I come down to Sterrett Brothers and buy the little 2 inches or 5 inches of embroidered lace because we were going to have a big time. Miss Cora was going to be married. When she married and left home, then I and my mother stayed at that house, and Miss Lillian Laidley was a beautiful person, and she liked me a lot. And when she'd go out ride, she had a big horse she used to ride, but she'd come in, I'd comb my hair, and she had great big yellow curls, and I'd put my arms up in my face. And the ladies then, from that time, when Mr. Laley became the superintendent of schools, why, then I could always have a friend at the court.
Now, see, Mr. B.S. Morgan, who is he?
Now, Mr. B.S. Morgan was state superintendent.
He was. I never heard of Mr. B.S. Morgan.
Did you ever hear Virgil A. Lewis?
Who?
Virgil A. Lewis?
No.
Point Pleasant?
No.
Well, both of those were state superintendents who gave me a chance. No Negro had ever been an institute instructor. And, of course, there was no integration, and you were instructor in colored institutes. And I was quite young, but Mr. B.S. Morgan thought I wanted to be there. I asked. I told Mr. Starks that I wanted to be an instructor, and he thought that was real funny. And he called Mr. Hazelwood to hear what I had to say. I'm young, one of the youngest teachers, and I want to be an institute instructor. And it never been a Negro, and it never been a woman. So Miss Shockey, Ms. A. Shockey came here and married Mr. Shockey. She came as institute instructor, and she married Mr. Shockey. And I liked the pretty ruffles on her dress, and I thought I'd like to be an institute instructor too. So I thought we were very good friends till she died. We were very good friends. And I got to be an institute instructor because Mr. Starks talked to the state superintendent, Mr. B.S. Morgan.
Am I right in thinking, or do I associate Miss Shockey with the teaching of the Bible?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I didn't know.
Teach colored classes. I used to have over the Mattiville home.
Well, that's interesting. Now let's see, who is the next one? Mr. William E. Staunton.
Well,
that's the Daily Mail.
Well, that was quite a step up for me because there wasn't another Negro in the country that was writing for a white daily, except Charlie Stewart was writing for the Chicago magazine paper, and I was writing. So that they arranged for us to meet down to Cincinnati, and we both worked on that convention, and I met him there.
Which convention?
It's the Baptist State Convention, one of our national conventions of the Baptists.
Well, that's interesting.
And Mr. Staunton, I think a lot of him, and he and I were good friends like I think of you, Mr. A very fine man. Tell him anything, and he could do something about it. Well, his father wanted to be the mayor of this town, and Mr. Starks had a colored paper, and Mr. Staunton was starting the Daily Mail. And he took Mr. Starks' paper over to help him to be the mayor of this town, and he printed Mr. Starks' paper weekly, and his was a daily. And he saved whatever copy I did for him for the daily for Mr. Starks' weekly, and that's the way they started out. And he did become the mayor of the city, and that's how I got on being a reporter for the Daily Mail. That's been many, many years ago.
Now, but Mr. Starks' paper, The Advocate.
That Charleston, West Virginia Advocate.
I can remember that.
What we say, you've got to have something to trade. You see, Mr. Staunton and Mr. Starks had something to trade. And until we get the idea that just being colored isn't going to do, you've got to have something to trade.
You mean you must contribute? You've got to contribute.
Not only, yes. You've got to participate.
Yes.
You've got to be a part of it. Whenever you want to raise money for a certain person, you've got as much right to come to Negro people for it as you have for white people. And we feel, and we don't have the money. We don't have the money for that. But that's one of the things I think we're going to have to learn. That's
what I like about the OIC. The slogan is, we help ourselves. We're not always on begging. We're not begging. We're going to help ourselves. Well, let's see now. Who is the next person there, Miss Fannie?
We have talked now.
Oh, we've talked about Mr. Starks, haven't we?
He's the editor of the West Virginia
Now, what about
Advocate.
Reverend Howard?
Reverend Howard was my spiritual advisor, as well as otherwise. He was a person who would just say, you mustn't do that, daughter. Like I danced, I remember once, and he knew it. And he didn't preach a sermon off of it. He had me come to his office at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he got on his knees, he prayed for me, and he says, now it's time for you on the way to school. And I never swerved from what he told me then in his prayer. So he went away to Pittsburgh in about 8 years. He came back and said, how'd you ever do about the dancing? I said, didn't dance anymore. He said, you can't, there's nothing wrong with dancing. He says, there's nothing in these sacred lids that tell you that dancing is wrong. But I'll tell you, you cannot serve your people as well dancing as you can if you keep them. And I believe that, and I never did.
Yes. Now, Miss Fannie, I know you could just go on and on and on, but I think our time is running out, and I think maybe you would
I
like
think
to
you
talk
finished
about.
everything you
No,
wanted.
I think that perhaps you would like to just summarize by speaking or mentioning the most thrilling experiences you've had. Just summarize here. Perhaps you could just run down these, Miss Fannie. And
Well, my work at Hampton Institute one summer as a teacher in the summer school there, that was very exciting to me. And when we landed in France at Havre, that was very exciting to me. There were
What year would that be?
1930. It was the year of the Passion Play. I was on my way to
over Ramagal.
on my way then. And then in Belgium, we had some very thrilling experiences there. Of course, the centenary was going on. There were just a lot of things, bands and music and marching, but there's just a lot of things about that. That was very exciting to me. And
Germany.
well,
You were your 75th anniversary of something that was going on there.
yes, of the airplanes. It was the 75th anniversary of the airplanes, and they were having it in Germany. And we went. That was exciting. And Holland.
You enjoyed that.
Oh yes,
Yes.
we went up
You
to
know-
Fantasy, and we were the guests of the hotel man that we stayed with, and it was very exciting. We went on his yacht up to Zuiderzee.
You know, I think, Mr. Winovich, that Miss Fannie has done a very great job. I'll tell you why. You can see that her life has been just filled with exciting experiences. Meeting fine people, doing fine things, and she could go on and on and on talking about these things. But I think we're going to end it now, but I want Miss Fannie
Tulip
to...
time in Holland.
Oh, you want to talk about...
No, I don't want to talk about that. I say we'll end
Yes,
with tulip time
in her. I think, too, that... have we mentioned Miss Kane's name and the people over to the Maddie B. Lee home were so very lovely, too?
No, and all of them there. I would hate to go into that. My story's too long, Mr. Reynolds.
Come on, we have another 15 minutes.
You have, so we can
have some
talk.
time.
Yes, she lives, Miss Fannie is just happily situated at the Maddie B. Lee home. And
that's so good to me.
And they're very good to her. Is Miss Kane now the executive secretary over there?
No, she is the, I think she's the housekeeper.
Is that so? But she's very good. And is Miss Christian over there?
No, Miss Christian, Maddie, one of my pupils. My
Miss
pupils
Maddie
are-
Carmel?
Mhm,
Miss
you know.
Maddie? Oh, and a dear
And
friend of mine.
not a day will she miss, not any day, Sunday or any day, that she misses come to see about me and do something for me.
Is that
Mrs.
so?
Carter, who was
Miss
Mary
Lewis.
V. Lee?
Miss Maddie V. Lee was my father's first cousin. Did you know that, Miss
No,
Fannie?
I didn't.
And it was Cousin Maddie who almost made me a Catholic. As a little girl, she took me to Sacred Heart. And she
Well-
finished Howard University. She was a doctor. And this home is named for her.
And she was a teacher here in Charleston, and we lived together. And
Yes.
she was a teacher here.
That's who she was, Dr. Maddie V. Lee. Yes. Now, Miss Fannie, what do you want to summarize in any way, and do you have
I'd
a
be afraid
thought?
to go into that
Do you have
because
a-
there'd be so many people that would feel.
Yes.
For instance, Earl Took, I think he's a marvelous person. His
You've
story
mentioned
is
him.
wonderful. His story of his children, I've never seen anybody had such a varied set, and then they're all fine.
Well, you mentioned him before.
Did
You
I?
talked about Earl. Yes.
Have I?
Oh, yes. You talked about him.
Well,
And
I'm
it's kind-
sorry, I wasn't planning to talk about these other people because I want to do that again.
Yes. Well, you think so much of them. Well, Miss Fannie, this has just been delightful talking to you.
Now, what's
And-
my philosophy?
Yes. What is your philosophy? Let's
The
hear
golden rule.
All right. You talk now. You have 15 minutes.
Well,
You
I'm
just
not
go-
going to talk about that. I'll just tell you that's my philosophy, the golden rule. Do unto others. I found it works. I ran my school at Huntington. I had a school for incorrigibles. And I could lie down in here, and if they wanted something, they'd come, Miss Carter, may I speak to you? And I'd say, yes, what is it you want? Bessie did so-and-so in the laundry. I came to tell you about it, but I had to go get Bessie. And she'd go get Bessie and say, Bessie, I came to tell Miss Carter about what you said in the laundry, and we all know what she's trying to do for us, and I came to tell her about it. And she told me what she did. And she'd start to crying. I'd say, well, now, why are you crying? I did wrong. And I know you tried to teach us to do right. Well, let's all cry. I do wrong sometimes. Can you girls settle that? They'd say, that's the golden rule up there. And they do it. That I wouldn't have anything to do. I didn't have to. The golden rule up there settled everything, and I had a good time. And they were girls. Some of them were out of jail. And Mr. Lakewood, when he'd come down, he'd stay over at our place so long that everybody complained that he always came to us. Because the girls, they learned anything. They could learn the longest Christmas plays. And Marshall University, yes. Well, they used to come over there and just take up all the seats. You see, they'd come early, like they wanted to look at the school and get the seats. We didn't have so much space. And I'd say this. I said, some of us are going to be late coming and put those porch seats back in the back. Because we were going to be late. And so that I didn't find that, I found that the girls wanted to do right when they knew what was right and you lived it before them. Yes. It wasn't a question of whipping and fighting and punishing.
Yes. But you know, Miss Fannie, you're speaking about the golden rule. You've practiced that too in all your relations with people. I think
I really think I learned that, and I've been working it, and it works.
Yes.
It'll work on Mr. Winovich if he does.
It works, I know it does.
I don't like to tell this one, but I was told from the club to go to a lady and ask her to give us $200 for the cooking class at the Mattaville home. And somebody said, don't go to her. She said, she'll call you a nigger right in your face. I said, I'd like to go to her. She said, oh, Miss Carter, she'll certainly do it now, I know. Well, I said, I'd like her to do it. And I went. And I was asking for $200. And I went, she opened the door. Well, what do you want? I said, I came to speak to you about a matter, and I think it's very cold. I said, I think I couldn't tell you right here. Come in. And we both stood right at the door. I said, I came as representative of Charleston's Improvement League, and we're having a cooking class, and we do our own cooking. And the people who we are paying for cooking will do your cooking. And we wanted to know if you wouldn't like to make a contribution to help to pay that teacher. She said, no. Why, she said I wouldn't have a nigger in my kitchen. I wouldn't have a nigger in my kitchen. That's what I'm doing out in the yard this cold morning, hanging up my dish towels. Well, she went on to tell me that the man who lectured last night said they kept the dishcloth bundled up in a bundle like that. And she said it's reeking with germs. Well, I said, Mrs. Bond, I couldn't blame you for that. You wouldn't want your dishcloth reeking with germs. I said, I couldn't blame you for that. But I said, don't you think that the women who do your cooking, if they'd been allowed to go to the Rialto and heard the man talk, that and heard the man talk as he did, don't you think they would have reacted just as you did? Well, she said, maybe it would. But that's what I thought I didn't want. And then we talked till 1 o'clock. And then when I came away, I had the $200 of her goodwill, and they never failed to be bringing their friends around. Miss Carter, we go to be shopping such and such. Could we drop by? And they'd have the nicest meals cooked, showing what they were doing with the money. And we were always very good friends. So I like to go where it's hot, because I believe I can come out. I really believe I can.
Well, thank you so very much, Miss.
Now I'm not blind.
You want to close with
yes.
All right.
My name, my place, and my tune, all forgotten. The long space of time well and patiently run. So let me pass away, peacefully, silently, only remembered by what I have done.
Thank you so very much, Miss Fannie. Thank you so very much.
I wish I was worthy.
Thank you so very much. This has been a delightful about 3 hours, hasn't it been? About a.
I'm never going to be there.
Oh, this has been just wonderful, hasn't it, Mr. Winovich?
I've enjoyed talking to you all.
Yes, but we'll let Mr. Winovich
Well,
make
I haven't done very much talking this afternoon, but if you've noticed as you looked in my direction, I sat here nodding my head in agreement with everything you were saying.
Well,
And thanks to Mr. Winovich for giving us the opportunity.
I do think, and because you can do so much better when you have faith in somebody, and that's one gentleman that Mrs. Winovich and I think is very fine.
We're close.
Well, please, and let me add that let me get in on that, please, Miss Fannie.
You think
All
it too,
right.
don't you?
Thank you, Mr. Winovich.
But she thinks what
All
her
right.
teacher thinks.
Although we have concluded this interview, Miss Fannie, I think that you would like really to summarize, and perhaps you'd like to call it Progress in Education from 1901 to 1962. Would you like to do that very briefly?
Yes, Miss Mama,
All
I'm
right.
ready to a teacher in the primary schools, Charleston. The head of the teachers training department.
Well, you're going to give the year.
Well, 1901.
Mm-hmm.
Teacher of the primary school in Charleston. 1908, head of the teachers training department at West Virginia State College. Served under 3 presidents: President McHenry Jones, President Bird Perelman, and President John W. Davis. Became supervisor of Kanawha County. Became supervisor of adult education in Kanawha County under Miss Elizabeth Goodall.
What year?
What is that?
What year?
Let me see.
You don't remember?
I don't remember the year.
Uh-huh.
Served at Bluefield State Teachers College. Served in...
As the institute instructor.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Served as the instructor. That was Mr. B.S. Morgan. See, that was it. Served as institute instructor through the state. 1926 became superintendent of State Industrial School for colored girls.
You became the first superintendent.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And became first superintendent of the girls under Governor Howard Gore. Retired, 62 years service in the field of education in West Virginia. Accepted work in Washington in the National Trade and Professional School. Then went there as Dean of Women in Dr. Nanny Helen Burris School for Women and Girls.
But you wanted to comment on her, a woman internationally known
As an educator, a churchwoman, and an orator.
In 1961, Dr. Burris died. Is that what you wanted to say?
Yes, in 1961, Dr. Burris died, and I became the president of the school.
And in 1962, the business problems required your presence in Charleston, and so you returned. But the point is, you began in 1901 as a primary teacher in Charleston,
and 1963
you became the president of the name of the school. What's the name of the school?
National Trade and Professional School.
In Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C.
Well, now
1963, that's when I came home.
So you came home. All right. Now, Miss Fannie, we're really concluding now, aren't we?
I hope so.
That's all. All right.